The record begins with a sound. Not an explosion, not a battle cry, not the shriek of weapons fire tearing through vacuum. A sound far smaller than any of those, the soft, rhythmic tapping of a single human finger against the armrest of a command chair, once every 3 seconds, with the patience of something that had learned to count time in a way the Vreth Collective had no category for. Admiral Sanvethek heard the audio capture 14 times before he understood why it disturbed him. It wasn't the tapping itself. It was the asterisk regularity asterisk. It never sped up. It never faltered. Not when the Vreth fire solutions locked. Not when the mass driver salvo crossed the minimum intercept threshold. Not when 1,700 of his fleet's targeting systems confirmed clean kill probability at 94.7%. One finger, one ship, one human. Tapping. The laughter started 6 hours before that recording was made. It began in the observation gallery of the Vreth Command Carrier Absolute Dominion where 300 fleet officers, logistics coordinators, and military strategists had gathered to watch what was, by any military calculation in the known galaxy, the shortest war in recorded history. Refreshments had been arranged. A junior signals officer had placed a small wager, 17 credit weight of compressed lattice ore, that the engagement would conclude before the light from it reached the nearest inhabited system. He nearly won. The object of their amusement appeared on the long-range display at 4:47 station time, a single vessel, running standard human propulsion, broadcasting on all diplomatic frequencies in the Universal Trade Band. The vessel was the *UNS Meridian*. Its registry classification listed it as a cruiser-class warship of the Sol Defense Fleet. Its listed crew complement was 412. 412 humans in one ship, against a Vreth battle fleet comprising 47 warships, a command carrier, 2 logistical support platforms, and 1 siege tender carrying enough mass ordnance to render a continent uninhabitable. The laughter was not unkind. That is worth noting. The Vreth Collective did not consider themselves cruel. They considered themselves rational asterisk. Signal analysis, said Fleet Commander Darasevek, standing at the holographic display with her arms folded in the formal military posture of her caste. She was 3rd-generation Fleet Command. Her grandmother had negotiated the absorption of 2-star systems without firing a single weapon. Darasevek had won 8 engagements. She had never lost a crew member. Tell me this is a symbolic gesture. It appears to be a warship, Commander, her signals officer replied carefully. I know what it appears asterisk to be. A pause. It is broadcasting a formal declaration of combat engagement, Commander, authenticated through human military protocol. They are requesting, the officer stopped. What? They are requesting we withdraw or face destruction, signed by the commanding officer of the Meridian*. Another pause. One Commander Elena Vasquez. The laughter surged again. Someone in the back of the gallery raised a drink. That was the first mystery, not that a single human ship had arrived, but that it had arrived alone. No support vessels trailing at distance. No cloaked picket line on the sensor horizon. No diplomatic convoy that might explain the gesture as theater. The Meridian came alone, and it came slow, with its transponders blazing and its weapon systems in what every Vreth sensor confirmed was a fully powered combat-ready state. It wasn't hiding, it wasn't running, it wasn't waiting for something. What was it doing? The second mystery arrived 3 minutes later, when Sanvethek's tactical officer completed the deep scan analysis. He reviewed the results twice. Then he walked across the command deck with the physical report in his hands, an unusual choice that drew attention, and placed it on the Admiral's console without a word. Sanvethek read it. His crest scales, the biological emotional display structure along his skull that the Vreth had never fully learned to suppress in military settings, flattened against his head, "This can't be right," he said. "I ran it 3 times, Admiral." The asterisk Meridian's asterisk weapon signature was wrong. Not deficient, wrong. The power profile coming off that ship exceeded its listed hull class by a factor the tactical officer described, in the dry language of military reporting, as significant. Where a cruiser-class vessel should have produced a weapons energy signature consistent with medium-range strike capability, the Meridian was generating something closer to a heavy assault profile. The mass was wrong too. Not lighter than expected, heavier asterisk. Something inside that ship weighed more than the hull should have permitted. And there was one more thing, a small thing, the kind of detail that a less experienced analyst might have filtered out as sensor noise. The asterisk Meridian had been modified. Recently. The hull-weld thermal signatures were less than 60 days old, and they were asterisk everywhere. The outer surface of that ship looked, on deep scan analysis, like something that had been taken apart and put back together by people who were working very fast and not particularly worried about elegance. Mystery 3. What had they built into it? Commander Elena Vasquez did not look like the kind of person who should be commanding a warship into the guns of 48 Vreth vessels. She was 41 years old, which by human standards meant she was neither young nor old, but by Vreth biological metrics placed her firmly in what their medical establishment classified as the post-prime functional window. She was medium height. She had a scar that ran from her left eyebrow to her jaw, old enough to be faded to silver. She had, according to the personnel file, the Vreth Intelligence Division had pulled in the first minutes of the engagement, spent the last 8 months on administrative leave, following a friendly fire incident on the Kepler relay station that had resulted in the deaths of 7 crew members, and a formal censure from the Sol Defense Council. She had not been cleared for active combat command. She had taken the asterisk Meridian asterisk without authorization. "Record is green," said Lieutenant Marcus Webb from the communications console, and his voice was careful in the way that voices get careful when the person speaking is watching a countdown that everyone else in the room is pretending not to watch. "All frequencies open, Commander." Vasquez didn't look up from the armrest where her finger was tapping. Once, twice, 3 seconds, once again. "Broadcast continuous," she said. "They're not responding to the withdrawal demand." "I know." Commander Webb started. "How long until they reach optimal fire solution?" A young ensign at the tactical board answered without being asked, because the number had been sitting in front of him for 4 minutes, and it was the kind of number that demanded to be spoken. 11 minutes, 30 seconds at current relative velocity. "Good," Vasquez said. She kept tapping. Webb looked at the ensign. The ensign looked at the deck. Neither of them said the thing they were both thinking, which was that 11 minutes was not, by any available calculation, enough time to do what the commander had told them she intended to do. They had run the numbers. They had run them again. The math did not change. What they didn't say, what no one on that bridge said, was what the math actually meant for the 412 people aboard the asterisk Meridian asterisk. Because Vasquez had told them clearly, before they crossed the engagement threshold, and they had agreed. An agreement had felt like courage at the time, and now that courage was doing something complicated inside each of their chests that didn't have a clean name. On the asterisk absolute Dominion asterisk, Admiral Sanvethek was no longer laughing. He was staring at the deep scan report. He was staring at the weapon's signature number. And he was asking his tactical officer a question that had seemed, 20 minutes ago, too absurd to voice. If that ship fired everything it has, everything, at maximum simultaneous discharge, what happens to the Fortuna's shield? The Fortuna's shield was the Vreth fleet's second largest warship. It was positioned at the center of the formation. His tactical officer did not answer immediately. He was running the calculation. He ran it twice. "Admiral," he said finally, the asterisk Fortuna's shield would be critically disabled. One ship, Sanvethik said. One asterisk human asterisk ship. If, and the Admiral should understand that this configuration is theoretically inadvisable. If they have coupled their power cores in series and overridden the safety limiters, then yes. One firing cycle at maximum simultaneous discharge would critically disable the asterisk Fortuna's shield. A pause. It would also almost certainly destroy the asterisk Meridian asterisk. Sanvethek's crest scales moved. He turned from the display. He did something that his command staff had seen only twice in his career. He walked to the communications console himself and personally opened the channel. Human vessel asterisk Meridian asterisk, he said, in trade band standard. You are addressing Fleet Admiral Sanvethek of the 1st Expansion Fleet. I am informing you that your tactical situation has been fully analyzed. We are aware of your weapons modification. We understand what one firing cycle would cost you. He let that land. We are offering you the opportunity to withdraw with honors. This engagement does not have to occur. The channel was open. The response came in 11 seconds. It was the sound of a finger tapping an armrest. 3 seconds of silence. Tap. 3 seconds. Tap. Then Commander Vasquez's voice, calm the way deep water is calm still on the surface, moving very fast underneath. Admiral Sanvethek, with respect, I heard you. Your offer has been considered. A beat. No. The channel closed. What happened in the next 9 minutes is documented in the Vreth Collective's official military record as an anomalous engagement outcome. That phrasing does a great deal of work. Sanvethek ordered the fleet to tighten formation, a rational response to a single-ship threat. Group the capital vessels, minimize the firing corridor the asterisk Meridian could exploit, overwhelm it with converging fire before it reached discharge range. It was, by every doctrine in Vreth military history, the correct response. The Meridian did not behave like a ship trying to reach discharge range. It decelerated. Webb called out the numbers as they changed, his voice dropping into the flat register of professional concentration that humans develop when they need their fear to wait. Velocity reduction confirmed. Commander, we are now. I see it. We're giving them the firing solution. I know. Commander, they're going to. They're going to try, Vasquez said. Webb, give me fleet disposition on the main screen and route the fire control targeting system to my console. You're going to shoot from here. I'm going to aim from here. You're going to shoot when I tell you. The Vreth fleet fired first. Of course they did. Sanvethek had a clean firing solution, a 94.7% kill probability, and no logical reason to wait. 1,700 targeting systems confirmed the same answer. Fire now, end the engagement, begin the record entry. The mass driver salvo crossed the intercept threshold at 94.7% accuracy on a stationary target. The Meridian was not there. This is the part of the record that junior Vreth officers review the most carefully and understand the least. Not because the physics are complex, they aren't, but because the decision that produced the outcome is so fundamentally alien to Vreth military thinking that it requires a framework the Vreth did not possess until much later. The asterisk Meridian had decelerated not to give the Vreth a better shot. It had decelerated because a full-power coupled core discharge requires the firing vessel to be below a certain velocity threshold or the gravitational feedback tears the ship's internal systems apart. Vasquez had not been stopping. She had been asterisk loading. The Vreth salvo passed through, where the asterisk Meridian had been 3.2 seconds earlier. The asterisk Meridian asterisk fired. What came out of the asterisk Meridian asterisk in that single firing cycle was not, technically, a weapon. It was more accurate to say it was an asterisk decision, made 6 months earlier in a Saul defense shipyard, by a team of engineers who had been told they had 60 days and impossible specifications, and who had responded to those constraints the way humans reliably respond to impossible constraints, by ignoring which parts of the problem were supposed to be unsolvable and working until they stopped being unsolvable. The coupled core discharge hit the Fortuna's shield in the center mass. It hit the Kethvara *, the fourth largest vessel in the fleet, on the port side. It hit the logistical support platform Endurance of Purpose across its entire forward section. It hit 7 smaller vessels with enough residual spread energy to disable their propulsion systems entirely. 11 ships, 1 firing cycle. In the observation gallery, the refreshments went untouched. No one had moved to collect the wager. Sonvethek stood at his console, and his crest scales were not just flat. They were pale, which in Vreth biology indicates something beyond fear. Something for which their language has a single word that translates, imperfectly, as the feeling of confronting a thing that should not exist *. "Get me that ship," he said. Here is what the Vreth Collective had concluded in the 6 minutes between the Meridian's appearance on their long-range sensors and Sonvethek's first transmission, that this was symbolic, a statement, a piece of theater designed to let humanity say, in the historical record, that they had shown up, that they had not surrendered without gesture. They had built an entire response strategy around that interpretation. They had calculated the political cost of destroying a symbolic vessel. They had prepared the diplomatic language for the post-engagement discussion. They had been ready. They were not ready for this. And here, this is the moment the Vreth records fixate on, the thing that gets analyzed in every subsequent strategic review. Here is where Admiral Sonvethek made what his own post-engagement report describes as the most consequential error of judgment in First Expansion Fleet history. He concluded that the discharge had used everything the Meridian had. He was not wrong that the shot had cost them. The deep scan confirmed it. The Meridian's power signature had dropped dramatically. She was running on emergency systems. Her propulsion was compromised. She was, by every reading he could take, a ship that had spent itself completely. He ordered the fleet to close. Webb pulled up the incoming trajectory data and did not speak for 3 seconds, which on a combat bridge is a long silence. Then, "They're coming in. All surviving vessels, closing formation, intercept course." "How many?" 36 operational, 11 disabled. A pause. 36 is still. "I know what 36 is, Webb." Vasquez was still tapping once, 3 seconds once. "Commander," Webb's voice had changed. It had lost the professional flatness. Something had gotten through the layer he'd built over the last hour, something he hadn't meant to let through. "Elena, what are we?" She looked at him then. It was a brief look, the kind that doesn't carry reassurance and doesn't try to, because she respected him too much to offer him the comfort of a lie. "We're doing what I told you we were doing," she said. "Our engineering ready. Reported ready 3 minutes ago. Then we're on schedule." What she did not tell Webb, what she had not told anyone except Chief Engineer Dara Osa, who had designed it and therefore already knew, was the second modification. The one that wasn't in the deep scan results. The one that the Vreth sensors hadn't found because it wasn't a weapons system. It had no power signature. It had no energy output. It just sat in the lower cargo hold of the Meridian inert, waiting, held in place by a set of magnetic clamps that would disengage on a single command from the navigation console. It was a reason. The Vreth fleet was 4 minutes from close-range firing position when Sonvethek's science officer came to his console with the look of someone who has found a piece of information and does not know what to do with it because none of the categories they possess are the right shape for it. "Admiral," she said, "I'm reading a secondary object. Interior of the asterisk meridian asterisk lower cargo section. It registered in the first scan, but I classified it as structural mass. She hesitated. It isn't structural mass. What is it? It's a beacon. She brought up the analysis. Specifically, it is a pre-coded data beacon of the type used in human long-range communication buoys. It's loaded with compressed signal data, and it's set to transmit automatically if the asterisk meridian's asterisk primary systems go offline. Sanvethek looked at the analysis. What signal? Unknown content, but the transmission address is. She stopped. Her translator took a moment on the coordinates. Admiral, the transmission address is the Sol home system, primary communications relay. It's addressed to every human media distribution network in their home sector. Silence on the command deck. She wasn't, said Sanvethek slowly, hiding her approach. No, sir. She wasn't waiting for reinforcements. No, sir. She came here to be seen asterisk, he said, not a question, clarifying it for himself because the framework was reforming all of it, every assumption he had built the engagement strategy on, collapsing and reassembling into a shape he found profoundly uncomfortable. If we destroy that ship, every human in their home system watches it happen. We don't get to frame what occurred. We don't get to write the record first. They do. His science officer did not answer because the admiral had not asked a question. And the beacon goes out whether we fire or they do, Sanvethek continued. She disabled her own primary systems with that discharge, the moment she fired. The beacon activated, yes. It's transmitting now, Admiral, has been for 7 minutes. Everything the Vreth fleet had done since the asterisk meridian asterisk opened fire was already being recorded and compressed and shot at the speed of light toward the Sol system. The formation tightening. The fleet closing in on a damaged vessel. 36 warships bearing down on one. She didn't come here to win, Sanvethek said. His science officer looked at him with an expression he could not read. Admiral, I don't think that's right either. Dara Osai's voice came through the engineering channel with the slightly strained quality of someone who had been working for 31 hours without sleep and had consumed enough stimulant compounds to qualify as a medical concern. Commander, core cycling is at 62%. I told you 50 was probably the ceiling. You also told me the first discharge was impossible, Vasquez said. I told you it was theoretically inadvisable. Is 62 giving me a second shot? A pause so long that Webb turned from his console to look at the speaker, as if eye contact with a speaker grill would make the answer come faster. Then, it's giving you something. I don't know if I'd call it a shot. More of a yes, you have a second discharge. Estimated output. 40% of the first, maybe less. Commander, I need you to understand that if we fire again, this ship is not going to be operational afterward. We are talking about complete propulsion failure. Life support on emergency reserves. We will need rescue. I know. Do you want me to say out loud what happens if rescue doesn't come? No, Vasquez said. Start the cycle. Webb was looking at her again. She didn't meet his eyes this time. She was watching the tactical display, where 36 red markers were 4 minutes from range, and she was tapping the armrest. And for the first time since the engagement began, the tapping changed rhythm. It sped up, barely, just enough. Webb, she said, open a channel to the asterisk absolute dominion. He opened it. She waited 2 seconds, 3, then, Admiral Sanvethek, I know you know about the beacon. I know you figured out what happens if you destroy us. Another pause, and her voice did something subtle and devastating. It got quieter. I want you to know that I know it too, and I want you to know that we are cycling for a second discharge. She let that sit in the channel for a moment. 40% of what we just put into 11 of your ships, she continued. You've closed your formation. I don't need a targeting solution. I just need to fire into the center of what you've built. The tactical display showed the Vreth formation. Compact, efficient, everything grouped together for the closing strike. "I'm giving you 3 minutes," Vasquez said, "because I think you're a rational species, and I think rational species, when they understand the full shape of a situation, tend to make different choices than they made when they thought the shape was simpler." She closed the channel. The command deck was quiet. Webb pulled up the engineering readout, the core cycle percentage ticking upward like a clock none of them wanted to watch. 67%. 70. "Commander," said the young ensign at tactical, his voice barely above a speaking level. Do we actually," he stopped. "Started again. Are we really going to fire?" Vasquez looked at the tactical display. 36 ships, 3 minutes, a beacon already transmitting, a crew that had agreed to something and was now living inside the agreement. "That," she said, "is what I am hoping Admiral Sonvethic is asking himself right now." The Vreth Collective's post-engagement analysis would spend considerable time on what happened in the next 2 minutes and 40 seconds on the Absolute Dominion's command deck. They would record it, review it, argue about it in strategic doctrine seminars for years. What they struggled to articulate, what no framework they possessed could quite account for, was the way a single human commander had simultaneously handed Sonvethic a tactical problem, a political problem, a logistical problem, and something that sat underneath all three of those like bedrock. A moral problem. Destroy the Meridian and the galaxy watches 36 warships kill a crippled vessel whose crew is sitting in the open on all frequencies, not running, not hiding, having fired twice and made their position known and sat still and waited. The beacon was already out. The record existed. The story was already written in the transmission. It just hadn't arrived yet. Don't destroy the Meridian and a single human ship, commanded by an officer on unauthorized deployment in a stolen warship, had faced the first expansion fleet and forced it to stop. Both options had consequences that extended far beyond this engagement. Both options taught the rest of the galaxy something about the Vreth Collective and something about humanity, and neither lesson was the one Sonvethic had intended to teach today. At 2 minutes and 12 seconds, he opened the channel himself. His crest scales were doing something complex, a pattern his staff had never seen, which the xenobiological record would later categorize as the physical expression of being made to understand something you did not wish to understand. "Commander Vasquez," he said. "Admiral, your second discharge. What is your honest assessment of our losses if you fire into current formation?" She answered without hesitation. 3 to 5 additional capital ships critically disabled. Significant damage to your support platforms. Your formation cohesion breaks, which means any coordinated close-range firing solution becomes tactically difficult. A pause. "I think you know this, Admiral. I think you ran these numbers before you closed the formation." "And you," he said, "your ship, your crew." She took longer to answer this time. Long enough that the channel carried only the faint sound of ship systems and beneath it, barely audible, the sound of that finger tapping. Once. 3 seconds. Once. "We will require rescue," she said. "We will survive if rescue arrives." Another pause. "I am confident it will." "What makes you confident?" "Because," Vasquez said, "this transmission is already home, and humans do not leave their people." Sonvethic sat with that for a moment. His science officer was watching him. His tactical officer was watching him. Every person on the Absolute Dominion's command deck was watching him, and none of them were laughing, and the refreshments in the observation gallery were still untouched, and the junior signals officer's wager had been quietly returned to him by the person holding it because it felt wrong to keep it. "Fleet," said Admiral Sonvethic, "all stop." The 36 Vreth warships decelerated in formation. "Broadcast to the human vessel," he said, Standard frequency, open. He straightened. His crest scales settled, not flat now, not pale, something else. Something that took his staff a moment to identify because they had not seen it directed at an enemy vessel before. Commander Vasquez, this engagement is concluded. Under the terms of the Galactic Compact, Article 17, I am formally requesting a ceasefire pending diplomatic discussion. He paused. Then, departing from formal language in a way that would also be noted in the record. I am also requesting that you stop cycling that core before your chief engineer has a medical event. A silence. Then, for the first time since the asterisk meridian had appeared on long-range sensors, something changed in the sound from the human ship. Not the tapping. The tapping was already still. What came through the channel was laughter. Not the laughter of the Vreth gallery, easy and dismissive and certain of its ground. Something different. Something that had been pressurized and contained for hours and was releasing now in the specific way that human tension releases when it finds, unexpectedly, a seam it can escape through. Short and helpless and real. With something underneath it that wasn't quite either sadness or relief, but occupied the territory where those two feelings border each other. Vasquez's voice, when it returned, was slightly unsteady in a way it had not been through any of the preceding exchange. Ceasefire accepted, Admiral, and, a breath, steadying, I'll pass your message to engineering. The Sol Defense Council's emergency session, convened 14 hours after the asterisk meridian asterisk beacon reached the home relay, lasted 9 hours. The recording of the engagement, transmitted in full, had already been reproduced across every major human news platform. The story it told was not ambiguous. Commander Elena Vasquez had taken an unauthorized warship, loaded it with systems her engineering team had been ordered not to build, crossed into disputed space alone, faced a fleet of 48 vessels, disabled 11 of them, and then sat still, and dared the most powerful military force in the sector to explain to the watching galaxy why they were going to kill her for it. The Council convened to charge her with 17 separate violations of military protocol, unauthorized use of Sol defense property, conducting an act of war without governmental sanction, and conduct unbecoming of a commissioned officer. The session lasted 9 hours. The charges were filed. Then they were reviewed. Then the Council spent 4 hours watching the transmission from the asterisk meridian's asterisk command deck, the full internal recording that Webb had been running from the moment they crossed the engagement threshold, because Vasquez had told him to run it and had not told him why, and he had not asked, and now the Council watched it. They watched her tap. They watched Webb's face doing the thing faces do when people have agreed to something and are inside the agreement, and the agreement is very large and very quiet. They watched the ensign who hadn't been able to finish his sentence. They watched Vasquez not flinch when the Vreth salvo crossed the engagement threshold. They watched Osai's voice come through the engineering channel, strained and sleepless, saying 62%, maybe less asterisk, and they watched Vasquez say start the cycle asterisk, and they watched her not look at Webb when she said it. After 9 hours, the Council voted. The charges were dropped. All of them unanimously. What replaced them, formally entered into Sol defense record, was a commendation. The language of the commendation was drafted by a council member who had spent 30 years in diplomatic service and was not given to imprecision. It described, in formal language, a strategic action that had demonstrated a category of human capability not previously codified in military doctrine, requiring the creation of new doctrine to contain it. The new doctrine was classified. Its existence was not. The Vreth Collective requested a copy. Sonvethek submitted his post-engagement report 8 days after the ceasefire. It was, by Vreth military standards, an extraordinarily long document. Most of it concerned tactical analysis, formation vulnerabilities, sensor calibration gaps, the specific engineering signatures they should have flagged in the initial scan. Standard material. The kind of content that fills post-engagement reports across every military in the known galaxy. The final section was not standard material. He had written it 3 times and deleted it twice, which was itself unusual behavior for a Vreth admiral, whose formal reports are generally produced in a single sitting. The section was short, 12 sentences. It concerned the question that had stayed with him since the ceasefire, not why Vasquez had done it, but what she had known about herself and about her crew and about her species that had made her willing to cycle that core a second time. He had made incorrect assumptions at every stage of the engagement. He had concluded, symbolic gesture. He had concluded, maximum discharge, nothing remaining. He had concluded, damaged and spent, close and finish it. 3 times he had looked at a human action, assigned it the meaning that fit his framework and built strategy on that meaning. 3 times he had been wrong. What he wrote in that final section, the 12 sentences he would not delete a 3rd time, was not an analysis. It was a question that he had, after 8 days of consideration, concluded he could not answer from within the Vreth framework. Could not answer because the framework was built on a foundational assumption he had never examined until this engagement put it under pressure. The assumption that any rational species confronting certain death at some point stops. "I do not know," wrote Admiral San Vethek, in the formal military language of the Vreth Collective, "at what point Commander Vasquez and her crew would have stopped. I reviewed the internal recording provided by the Sol Defense Council following the ceasefire. I reviewed it 11 times. I watched the individual faces of the crew members at the moment the fleet began its closing maneuver. I looked for the moment at which they were calculating whether continuation remained viable. I could not find that moment. I do not believe it occurred. I believe they had decided, before they crossed the engagement threshold, that continuation was not contingent on viability. I do not have a military category for this. I do not have a strategic category for this. I find that I require one, because a species that removes viability from the decision matrix of continuation is a species against which doctrine built on expected rational behavior will fail in ways that prior analysis cannot predict. I am requesting authorization to establish a new study division. Its specific focus: under what conditions does human decision-making cease to reference survival as a constraint? Preliminary assessment: none identified. The Meridian was recovered by a Sol Defense rescue vessel 19 hours after the ceasefire, while Vreth fleet assets maintained respectful distance at San Vethek's direct order. Webb supervised the structural damage assessment from the bridge, surrounded by the quiet aftermath sounds of a ship that had been run very hard and was now resting. He filed his preliminary damage report. He sent the engineering status to Osai, who was asleep for the first time in 36 hours. He made sure the beacon had been properly logged in the transmission record. Then he sat in his console chair for a while and did not do anything administrative. Vasquez found him there an hour later, when she came back to the bridge after the medical team had cleared her for post-engagement status. He didn't turn when he heard her footsteps. She settled into the command chair, and the bridge was quiet, and outside the viewport, the stars were doing what stars do, shining from positions they had occupied for millions of years before this engagement and would occupy for millions of years after, indifferent and constant and very far away. "You knew we weren't going to fire the second shot," Webb said, not an accusation, a realization newly complete. Vasquez didn't answer immediately. "I knew it was possible we wouldn't need to." "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." A long silence. The ship breathed around them, the sound of systems on minimal power saving what it had. "Did you know it would work?" Webb asked. "The whole thing from the start, did you know?" She thought about that for a while, with the particular quality of thought she gave to questions she took seriously. "I knew what the beacon meant. I knew what they'd calculate once they found it. I knew that the Vreth Collective has never in recorded history destroyed a vessel that was transmitting openly on all frequencies to a home audience, because the political cost has always been higher than the tactical gain. She paused. I knew the math. Then why? He stopped, tried again. The core cycle, the second discharge, if you knew the math. Because knowing the math wasn't enough, Vasquez said. They had to know that I knew it and didn't care. She looked at her hand, the one that had been on the armrest, and turned it over once in the low light. The tapping wasn't me being calm, Webb. I was terrified the whole time, every second of it. She closed her hand. But the math says, a species that appears unafraid of the outcome is a different negotiating problem than a species that appears afraid. So I needed to be the math. Webb was quiet for a long time. The stars continued doing what they were doing. The 7 people on the relay station, he said finally, very carefully, the thing that had not been spoken between them. She went still. Was this? He stopped. This was territory he wasn't sure he had the right to enter, but they were on a bridge alone in the quiet after something enormous. And the question had been sitting in him since before they crossed the threshold, since before she'd asked him to run the recording, and it was not going to leave. Was some part of this about proving you were still? Yes, she said. Short, complete, no revision offered. She didn't look away from the viewport. He didn't press. It was the kind of yes that closed around itself when it was spoken and didn't open further, and he understood that. What he understood, sitting there, was that the person who had designed this engagement had not only known the math of what the Vreth Collective would calculate. She had also known, with the particular precision of someone who had spent 8 months inside her own failures, exactly how much she was willing to risk to stop being a person who did not finish the thing she started. The two knowledges were inseparable in her. He could see that now. The strategic clarity and the personal accounting, braided together so tightly that pulling them apart would have destroyed the thing that made either of them work. She had come here with a reason that was also a weapon. The Vreth had found the beacon and thought they understood it. They'd been partially right. But the beacon was never only about transmission. It was also about what happens to a person who finally does the thing they needed to do and sends it home and lets it be seen. The record of the engagement between the UNSS Meridian and the Vreth First Expansion Fleet entered galactic military history under a classification designation that translates from the standard archival language as anomalous outcome requiring categorical revision. It was studied at the Vreth War College, the Syndicate Defense Institute, the Kepler Strategic Academy. It was debated in 4 separate galactic diplomatic forums, twice cited as precedent in territorial negotiation proceedings, and once used as the central evidence in an argument before the Galactic Compact Assembly that resulted in a formal amendment to Article 17. In almost none of these contexts was it described in terms Vasquez would have recognized. It became a doctrine. It became a case study. It became a data point in 12 separate papers about the strategic implications of asymmetric engagement. What it was underneath all of that. 412 people in a ship that had been taken apart and put back together, agreeing to sit very still in front of 48 vessels with their weapons running and their beacon broadcasting and their core cycling. Because one woman with a scar and 8 months of administrative leave and a very specific kind of unfinished business had done the math, and then decided to be the part of the math that didn't fit any framework a rational species had ever built. Sanvethek's study division was approved. It produced 6 classified reports in its first year. The first report's executive summary contained a single line that was reproduced, in various forms, in every subsequent document the division produced, and eventually in military doctrine documents across 17 species. The line read, "The limiting factor in human decision-making under existential threat has not yet been identified. Current hypothesis, the limiting factor does not exist. Operational implication, Engage with extreme caution and do not mistake endurance for hope. He was wrong about one thing. The limiting factor exists. Every human who has ever sat with a cost they could not reduce and a thing they could not leave undone knows where it lives. It lives exactly where Vasquez's finger stopped tapping. Not when the fleet halted, not when the ceasefire came through, not when the rescue ship's transponder appeared on the long-range sensors. It stopped when Webb, sitting next to her in the quiet after everything, asked his question, and she said yes, and the word settled and she let it. The galaxy learned to be afraid of human warships that day. What it has never quite learned, what San Vethek spent the rest of his career studying and could not reduce to a doctrine, is that the warship was never the point. It was just the shape a debt to 7 people takes when a woman who doesn't know how to stop finally decides to finish something, and points it at the largest obstacle available and starts counting.